sharing. And let's get into our discussion today. So today we are talking about, as I said, the book Inspired by Marty Cagan. And people have been singing the praises of this book for as long as I can remember. It came out, I think the first edition came out in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's a second edition, which is really kind of what we're talking about now. And he retitled it a little bit. It was originally just how to build products people love, but or your customers love, and retitled it in the second edition to how to build tech products, because really his advice was really focused on tech products. Marty has a rich background in product management from Hewlett Packard, from eBay, and many other well-known companies. And then several years back, created the Silicon Valley Product Group to help inspire other product managers and product leaders to build great products. And, one of the things that, if you've talked to me very much, that I'm really excited about is using Product Coffee as a platform to help us all look at what we do as product people and build products that really have a radical impact on the customers and the companies that we choose to invest our time for. So I thought it was high time that we came back and got back to a really good, robust basics discussion about what it takes, what it means to be a great product manager and deliver amazing products. And Marty's book, I think, is a great foundation for that discussion. So I want to start by, I sent out a couple of questions. What's some of your favorite quotes or little passages from Inspired are that really kind of impacted you or caused you to think?
Hey, Jason, I'll start.
Great, Howard.
This is Howard. On page 130, which is in the chapter about principles of product vision. And this is something that, as I've been working with this little healthcare tech startup, and we've got doctors on, our principals are all a bunch of physicians that decided that there was stuff they needed to fix in healthcare. And so I say this a lot, and the quote is, the product vision needs to inspire. Remember that we need product teams of missionaries, not mercenaries. More than anything else, it is the product vision that will inspire missionary-like passion in the organization. Create something you can get excited about. You can make any product vision meaningful if you focus on how you genuinely help your users and customers. And I think the key there is taking the corporate vision, which ours is very clear, right? Trying to help empower people to manage their own healthcare journey. If you can align your product vision to that and get people to rally around it and use it to make staffing decisions and coaching and mentoring decisions, that product vision can go a long way to inspiring not only your company and the product teams you work with, but really everyone around you, including your customers.
That's a great insight and good perspective around it as well. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Justin. I would definitely second that, the product vision. And that's what I love so much about his second book, Empowered. It is really for those product leaders, and how do you take the company's objectives and put it into a product vision. And what's different from, every company has a mission and a vision, and sometimes there's just words on a wall. What is it? What's all the difference to them? The company's mission and vision are often very internal focused. What are we going to do? And the product vision really needs to be about the customer. What's the vision of the customer experience in 3 to 10 years, and get very, very specific about the customer, because it's only when we're fulfilling and providing value to our customers do we get value ourselves. It's our customers have to have success for our companies to have success. And that's, I think, a big thing on the product vision. For me, one of my favorite quotes that I use a lot of the time, he talks about the 2 truths of product. One is only half of our ideas are going to work. We don't know which ones. and the ones that do work usually take many, many, many iterations. And I think this goes back to the other person's question around, well, you ask users, and I think you can, but you got to be very, very careful what you do with that information, because another quote from the book says, a lot of times users don't know what they want until you show it to them, right? So, and people tend to think in terms of solutions rather than problems. So if you do get a list of, hey, here's all these features that we want, get on a call and find out why. Why do you want that? How are you going to solve that? And another key concept from this is don't do it alone. Make sure you're using your engineers to get on the calls along with your product designer. Everybody will see it a different way, but if you're only using your engineers to code, you're only getting about half of their value. And usually some of the best ideas come from your engineers. So those are some of my favorite points from Inspired.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin. And completely agree. And something that you just said there drew me back to the earlier discussion on the enhancement requests and one of those voice of the customer tools that we see, specifically the conversation with Atul around the enhancement requests and feature request type of forums and capabilities. Customers, although he didn't say this in exactly these words, one of the things that he did, that Marty does kind of point out in this book in a slightly less direct way, is that customers tend to define the problem or define their need in the context that they have. So when you give them that feature request capability, they're going to ask about things, or they're going to suggest things based on the context that they have. And to your point there as well, it's not just about hearing that, it's about really going 2, 3, 5 levels deeper to understand the deeper why and the context around that and what the real problem is that they're facing, so that you can really tease out that true customer problem and business objective, not just have that feature focus.
Yeah, he quotes Simon Sinek's "Start with why," right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of time you have to ask why 5 times to really get into what do they really, really want.
Absolutely. Yep. Who else had great. Bruno, I see your hand up. Why don't we go over to you?
A few days ago, I was reading the product, a book from Dan Osland. Do you already heard it? My English is not so good.
It's okay.
But it's a book from Dan Olsen called the Product Marketing Playbook. It's something like that. And in this book, and in his book, he talked about ask a lot of questions to get deeper the real problem, the problem and the cost.
Was it the Lean Product Playbook?
The Lean Product Playbook. Yes,
Yep.
yes.
As a matter of fact, he has actually reached out and connected with me on LinkedIn, and we're going to look to have him come and talk about that book in a future session as well. So definitely looking forward to that discussion.
Oh,
so that'll be a fun one as well. Let's see. Let's go over to Mohammed.
Well, something that caught my attention is that Marty doesn't seem to be a big fan of roadmaps, actually. The fact of the matter is, when you see a job offer, the first thing you notice when someone is asking for a product manager, the first thing he asks for is that you have already built and managed and shipped roadmaps. I think most people around here know that they probably built roadmaps. They probably never shipped the original version, not even half or 3/4 of the version of the first roadmap that they delivered. He says that, however, there are some convenience for product roadmaps, most specifically because it gives a very precise time delay for shipping, which is extremely valuable for management. So he does, I don't remember exactly in which terms he used, but he does offer alternatives that provide the same advantages of the roadmaps without the illusion of roadmaps give, that we will ship 106 features in 2 months with all the hassle that comes with it. So This is actually very interesting. I believe in that, but despite that, I think across the industry, roadmaps remain an obsession, and especially for upper management.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at 90% of the job descriptions out there for people who are hiring product managers, it's about you will create and maintain the roadmap. That's one of the core responsibilities. And I didn't take that he was necessarily opposed to roadmaps in general because he understood the need for them and the purpose of them. I think his beef, as I interpret, is really with how they're used and how a feature-based roadmap doesn't really provide the right value, and how can you shift away from that thinking. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite entire chapters in the book was, I think it was like 61, maybe. Yeah, 60. Weaning an organization off of roadmaps, and really talking about how do you shift that conversation so that how do you train your stakeholders and even your customers to stop asking about the roadmap and start asking the more important questions about how we're doing in our business. And my quote that I had selected actually was actually a pretty long one, but it was understanding the nature of the roadmap itself. And this is where it kind of took, where I take the turn. It's not that he's opposed to them; he understands them, but he just doesn't like the way that they don't solve the problem in the right way unless you're intentional about it. He said, for this to work, it's important to acknowledge the two big reasons why stakeholders especially are so attracted to roadmaps. And this is understanding your customer again, right? Because your stakeholders are your customers in this case. They want some visibility into what you're working on and assurance that you're working on the most important items. And they want to be able to plan the business and need to know when critical things will happen. And as I think about that, I get pretty self-critical actually, because in my last role, I was responsible for delivering the roadmap for a pretty large product. And I focused with my team very heavily on that feature-based roadmap. And I'd read this at the time, and it's a trap that you fall easily back into, because your customer, your stakeholders, they ask you the question in the context that they know. When is this feature going to be ready? And developing that skill of shifting the conversation to when are we going to deliver this value, and what's the value that we're trying to deliver. And but at the same time, being able to help the marketing organization plan for how they're going to communicate what's coming, help your finance leadership understand what impact to revenue, what levers you might be pulling to impact revenue in the future, and kind of being able to project the business. Those are important customer needs, and being able to answer those is pretty critical as well. Let's see. I think Atul was next.
I think.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Justin.
One more thing on that. I think that goes back to my original comment. Is one of the reasons why Marty does not like roadmaps is because we don't know what ideas are going to work, and the ones that are due are going to take several iterations. How many times do we get so focused on shipping a feature, and then that feature never gets used because it didn't solve the original problem, right? So how do we solve the problem? And one of the things I just told my team a few weeks ago, look at a regular roadmap, right? Like a physical, like driving roadmap. How many of them have future dates on it, right? The only date on the roadmap is the date it's published. It's it shows a bunch of different ways you can get there. And I think too much of the time we confuse and use a release plan, and we call it a roadmap, where Marty get very, very focused on the outcomes. What problem are you trying to solve? How do you know that's going to be solved? What's the outcome? And then as the product roadmap needs to be, this is what we're focused on now, the business results we're focused on, and we're going to have to iterate on these features until we get to the results, the measurable results that actually implement what's going to be there. And another good follow-up book, if you're interested in that talks about it, is I think it's Product Roadmaps Relaunched. And it really talks about shifting from a feature-based roadmap to an outcomes-based roadmap.
Bruce McCarthy is one of the authors of Product Roadmaps Relaunched, and a good friend of Product Camp and Product Coffee, and has been a client of mine in the past. He's a really great writer and thinker in the product management space. So that's a good call out. Thank you, Justin. Let's switch over to Atul. Atul, you had a thought.
Okay, so one of my favorite quote from Inspired is, when a product succeeds, it's because everyone on the team did what they needed to do. But when a product fails, it's the product manager's fault. And it completely resonates with the product success, because when the product fails, it's also because even whatever they worked, whether it was a feature factory or something someone told, even then engineer worked, everyone else worked and they delivered. It's just that customer did not want it. So when it works, it's because everyone did what they needed to do. But when it fails, it's product manager's fault. Yeah, that's from me.
Absolutely. How many of you have encountered that? Lots of head nods here on the camera. Yeah, right. And I've always thought that was kind of a funny truth. Funny, not funny as in makes me want to laugh, but funny in the, ironic. When early on in my product management career, there was a big, massive shift from waterfall to more agile techniques in development organizations. And there was a lot of discussion about Scrum methodology. And there was a popular concept as part of the Scrum methodology, where you talked about in your stand-ups, you have two classes of players in the stand-up. You have pigs and chickens. And the story was, when you're making breakfast, you will use pigs and chickens. The chickens are involved in making the breakfast, but the pigs are really committed. If you're going to have bacon and eggs, the pig is definitely all the way committed. And so they would refer to different characters in a stand-up as pigs versus chickens. And the idea was, your product managers are just chickens. They're involved and they've got opinions and they've got input into the process, but their neck is not on the line if the product doesn't work. It's the engineer. The thought was, if the product doesn't work, the engineers are on the line. The reality is, everyone has their part to play, as he points out. And one of the other things that Marty said, pointed out in the book, it's, if the software doesn't work, or if there's a problem, who's going to get the call in the middle of the night? It's not the product manager, it's the engineer, right? And so that part of the pig versus chicken analogy is very much true, in that engineering is going to get pulled into issues in the field if things don't work well. But at the same time, the product manager is going to be held accountable for the whole program. You're absolutely right. If everybody does their job and it's a win, then everybody executed and we won as a team. So let's switch to David. David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have a quote yet, but I had a question about involving the engineers in the conversation with the customers. When you have a team, I think that the teams can vary between 3 to 12 people in the product management, as mentioned in the book. And the thing is, who do you invite from the engineers team? Do you invite in either a customer interview or focus group, or how do you select the engineer?
That's a really great question. What have people done? Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. As I kind of in my career, and as started off as a founder, the only employee, so I had to program it, and then I had to sell it, and then as we started bringing on more and more engineers, I think one of the key things to our success was that link between the customer and engineering. And one of the things that we started off really, really early on as we brought in more and more engineers was, one, we really tried to get an engineer on like a demo at least once a quarter, so they could sit in and really hear, why do we exist? What are the problems? Prospects were coming to us, and really understand, what do we do? Another thing we did as a whole company, we would take a customer and we would have the whole company join a virtual session, and that customer would walk through a day in the life of using our software. And they would just kind of talk and walk through how they used it. The whole company would watch. Usually there was a pain point that an engineer would see that they would know, like, oh my goodness, that is such a simple fix. And usually within a week, there was something really good that came out of that, but it helped them learn. I think as a general thing, really focusing on what's that trio when you're doing customer calls. So, the engineer, the product designer, and the product manager. We'll often start with the technical lead on the team and really being included in that collaboration. I think we tend to use our tech leads the most, but I think it's important to bring in other engineers. And as there's projects that other engineers are passionate about and they need to learn, every engineer needs to understand the user. So I would say every engineer needs to be included in that, but it's going to probably go through the tech lead the most. But let the tech lead bring in engineers as they see fit. So everybody on the team really knows who their user is.
Just like to add on that too, from Marty's perspective, that trio of the product manager, the product designer, and then the tech lead being that trifecta that's doing this continuous discovery model. I think it's important to note that from his point of view, on the tech side of things, the engineers, they're about 15 to 20% to facilitate with feasibility risks. The rest of their time is delivering software, right? And so from the perspective of how much time is each individual contributing to that continuous discovery model, designer and product manager are tackling risks of, is this valuable? Is it usable? Is it viable for our business? And then that tech lead is really responsible for that feasibility and kind of involved, as Justin was saying, from sitting in on actual calls and exploratory conversations with customers for generative research, for sure.
I think there are a lot of different types of interviews that you might be conducting as well. And Marty, started in chapter 41 talking about customer interviews and talked through a few different techniques. And he specifically, one of the hints that he gave David in his perspective and experience, a little phrase in there was, we normally rotate among those that want to attend. So your question was, how do I pick which engineer to bring with me? And so I think part of it is starting with who would like to attend, and then just rotating through them. And I think that's actually a pretty simple way to do it, but a really powerful way to do it, because as he pointed out elsewhere in the book, not all engineers are going to want to sit in front of customers and participate in that type of an exercise. They want the feedback, they want the insights that you get from it, but they don't want to be there. Some do. So start with the ones who do. That may catch on with others as well, but and then just rotate through. I think Justin's point of bringing someone more senior in some situations, and think about what's the type of interview I'm doing. What's the skill set of each of the people on my team, and using that to help drive the insights. In the core interview that Marty was talking about, though, in chapter 41, one of the things that he was kind of really specific about is some of the interviews that you should do. We talked about demos and customer meetings, but a lot of times these interviews, these are just pure customer discovery interviews. You are not there with an agenda to validate, to demonstrate anything. You are there to literally learn about the customer. And so there's not a demo context. You might do a demo to give some value to the customer as well. But the core of that interview is to understand, is my customer who I think they are? Are they interested in the things that I think that they're interested in? And what are the problems that they're facing right now that maybe I'm not seeing? So, and from that perspective, it doesn't take a specific set of expertise from a specific engineer. It's just, you want another set of eyes with that technical perspective, thinking about the product in the context of the customer's experience.
And one last thing on that, so much of the time engineers are introverted, and just the fact of getting on a call with somebody, they don't like that. I think in today's virtual world, it's a lot easier. And I think, talk to your engineers, understand the involvement they want to do. And if they just want to sit in the background and listen as you guide the discussion and the why, they will get a lot out of it, and they will get a completely different perspective than you can, because they know what is feasible. They're responsible for the feasibility risk, and they will give a whole bunch of insights without even speaking. So just understand the comfort level of your engineer, and really encourage them. And in the beginning, set the expectation. They don't have to say anything if they don't want to.
Yep. That absolutely great point. You're absolutely right. Get them comfortable and let them know there's no heavy lift for you. This is a learning exercise. Make of it what you will. Great point. Thanks, Justin. Steve Youngblood.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that the discussion on a roadmap, fully understand why when you produce something that says I'm going to do this, it becomes somewhat written in stone, and we know that things are changing all the time. The problem is that when you're out raising money, people aren't going to give you money unless you can show them a path. You have to show a use of funds. And so you kind of have to walk a tightrope. You have to say, I'm going to be doing these things knowing you're not going to be necessarily doing those things. So I think it's okay when you have a product and it's been out there for 5 years or 6 years and you're running down this path where you're looking at the next 2 weeks or the next 4 weeks. But I'm always having to project, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, because people are giving you money. And when they ask for that, you can school them, which means you walk away with no money, or you can give them a roadmap and say, this is a representation of what we're going to do based on what we know now. And so I think you have to, everything's not written in stone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to be a little careful. I know, because I'm raising money right now.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, this is hot on your mind, right?
That's correct. So I'm always having to walk between literally writing code today, or working with my engineers today, or basically telling a potential customer what I'm going to be rolling out in the next month, or telling an investor what I plan to do with their money over the next year. And so, and you and I know that it's going to change. The minute I commit to something, odds are it's going to change. So I think we all need to be a little bit realistic. We have to produce things based on what people ask. And sometimes you might say, well, if that's what they want and they're that stupid, I don't need their money. Well,
I still need your money.
I still need your money. Yes. And a lot of times the people that you're asking money for, it's not just the money, it's the potential introductions that they can provide you, or the other, other advice and guidance they can provide you. So I think it's all best we walk a careful tightrope and sometimes do things that we know are not necessarily the best things to do, but I'm not saying we lie and cheat.
Right. I think my big takeaway, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I think tightrope is the perfect word, because you do have to do that forecast. And I think Marty calls those high integrity commitments, right? Like, be careful what you do, but then make sure that if you make a commitment, you do it. And you have to be very, very careful, because so many roadmaps, they're wrong. And if you're saying we're going to do all these things, and then sales several quarters see you don't do those things, your whole engineering organization, they lose trust in you. So you've got to kind of do that tightrope of how much can you go out and project, what is a high integrity commitment, while at the same time being really mindful of keeping it realistic. Because if you say you're going to do a whole bunch of things and then you don't, you will lose respect of a large portion of the organization.
Yeah, and to add on that, one of the big keys there was keeping that high integrity commitment grounded in the value that you're creating with it, so that the communication continues to be, here's the thing that we're committing to delivering, but we're going to really talk about the results that it's bringing and why that's good or why it's not getting the result that we intended it to get, so that we can change that conversation with those stakeholders over time as well.
I think that's the key, because a lot of the roadmaps I've seen are exercises in mediocrity, right? All it is just this huge wish list, sales wish list, marketing's wish list, implementations wish list. And now it's not really product management at all. And you've committed yourself to a bunch of junk.
Yep, and it's an easy trap to fall into, even with the best intentions. It takes serious discipline and practice to avoid that trap and evolve the way you approach it. And that's why I think, he talks about exceptional companies and really leading companies, and not everybody does it this way. But he tries to make the case that your true leaders and your most exceptional product managers and product leaders and leading technology companies do make this shift and have the conversation in that way, no matter as hard as it may be. I want to switch over to Bruno. Bruno, you're up.
Oh, sorry. I raised sin querer.
Oh,
Sorry.
no worries. All right, then Jeff Meddy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I read this, code a couple of years ago, and I was going back through my notes as we were going through this today. And the thing that kind of seemed relevant to me was all other things being equal, co-located teams are going to substantially outperform dispersed teams. That's just the way it is. And I was thinking to myself, well, I mean, we've been very successful in the COVID world. Is that still true? Is it just less true? But that was kind of the one that hit me, like, what will we go back to when we can?
Yeah, it's a really great question. You're right. I thought about that too. Does anybody have any plan? Justin, I'd be interested in your scenario as well. Or is your team co-located? You mentioned you're driving in somewhere. Is your team currently co-located? Are you thinking about the difference between co-located and non-co-located or dispersed groups?
Yeah, very much so. So, the startup that I helped found, we were acquired in 2019. At that time, we had about 40 full-time employees. About 15 of them were actually located here in Columbus. Most of that was engineering, but we had several engineers that were remote. I was here in Columbus. We had our product designer here. Then our actual tech lead was remote. So remote teams can work, but you have to be very, 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 very intentional about that and how you build the culture. One of the things, our CEO that we brought on led great teams and very, very focused on what are we doing, what are we not doing, and how do we treat one another. Going back to the values, your company values are the behaviors and how you treat one another, which gets how work gets done. Your culture is how work gets done, and values, they have to be lived out. And I think that's a key part of it. And one of the things that we would do, we would get together a whole company 3 times a year. So I think even the remote can work, but there's an aspect of that face-to-face. When we'd have a company meeting, some of the best discussions were, at the bar after the real meetings, where you'd have an engineer sitting with a salesperson and they'd solve all the world's problems, right? But it's building that relationship. And if you're familiar with Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, you've got to build that first layer of trust, which then leads to healthy conflict. And if you're not having healthy conflict, you're not doing what's best for the organization. So as we're going back, we know it's not going to look like what it was before. And realistically, do we need as big of an office as we need? And we're looking at probably doing a hybrid. And, probably 2 to 3 days at home, 2 to 3 days in the office. But what does that mean? And let's be really, really intentional when we're in the office. Let's do those things that you can only do in person, right? Let's go have coffee. Let's go take a break and walk around the building. Let's grab lunch. Let's whiteboard. Whiteboarding ideation is very, very, very hard remotely. It can be done, but let's be real intentional and come together and plan your time. So at least the product manager, the product designer, and the tech lead are together maybe 1 day a week where they can. Now, it's not going to be every week and it's going to be everybody, but if you're remote, be really, really intentional about how do you build relationships, because that's the foundation of all of your success.
Hey, Jason.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Jerry Edenwelder. Another comment on this particular point. There's another product manager out there. He was most recently with Comcast in their security group, but his name's Larry Maccheroni, and he used to be with Rally Software and has, I believe, his PhD from Carnegie Mellon. I know he did research with Carnegie Mellon. and he did a paper, I guess it's several years old. You may still be able to find it on the internet. It's called The Impact of Agile Quantified. And I want to say he presented it at an Agile conference in 2015, but don't hold me to that. I might be wrong. Anyway, his research at Raleigh in conjunction with Carnegie Mellon, they kind of uncovered that distributed teams worked better when the teams were all in the same time zone, and that it was actually a time zone shift that contributed more to the dysfunction of distributed teams, not so much the fact that they were distributed. Probably a lot to what Justin was just talking about, you know, if we're distributed in the same city, we can still get together occasionally to do those things that are better done in person. If we are distributed in a different country, it becomes more difficult. But at least if we're in the same time zone, we are all operating on the same cadence.
Yeah. That is a great point. I made a note of that as well here to kind of go look up that talk as well. The impact of Agile Quantified. And who did you say it was that gave that talk?
The gentleman's name is Larry Maccherone, Maccherone. And yes, I looked that up.
I think that talk or something similar to it is mentioned. I think it's the book Team Topologies. I know that's something that Marty mentions in his book Empowered. I just finished reading Team Topologies, and that's one of the things it talks about is staying in the same time zone, because it's just a lot easier to coordinate things. And you can have a remote company, but try and get your teams, you know, a larger company is going to maybe have hundreds of teams. Try and have your entire team in at least the same time zone. And you might have a whole bunch of teams across different time zones, but have everybody in your team. And I think that's one way to minimize the barrier of, oh, this is during my supper time or your lunch time, right? It makes that a lot easier.
Yeah.
That's a great call out, Jerry. Jerry, you also had your hand up. Did you have another thing that you wanted to touch on?
It was actually for that.
Okay.
I thought I had lowered it, but
I did.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we didn't skip over you on the other thing.
It turned out that the other folks covered much of what I was going to say. So good for them. Yeah, some of the earliest studies directly related to COVID are beginning to mature now, and some of the findings coming out. And it is very much what people are saying. You can be effective entirely dispersed. But if you want inspiration and breakthrough, you need to have high quality in-person time. And the art of emerging from the lockdown is the balance. Because you know, a lot of people have gotten very comfortable being fully remote, and they believe themselves to be effective, and they are very effective as individual contributors. But to the extent that your brand and your roadmap and your strategy and what have you is going to rest on collaboration and breakthroughs, you need to have that in-person time as well.
One more thing real quick on this. I just saw a video last night from Simon Sinek, and he said that the reason why we were so successful during COVID was because we knew each other beforehand.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a lot more difficult if, you know, as we bring on more and more new people, they've never met anybody.
Yeah.
And I'll try and find that video. I just watched it last night. I'll post that in the notes
Great.
from Simon Sinek.
Just to build on what Justin said just now, I am already seeing that. I have a number of people I work with that have started with their companies, and they tell me that they feel like strangers at the bus stop. You know, and there's no magic, there's no cohesion between them and their team. They are in fact effective. They can get their tasks done, but they don't feel any connective tissue.
Yeah, my perspective on that is exactly what Justin was saying and what Simon Sinek said. When we had to go virtual, we actually created a better connection with people that we used to be in the office with. because the first thing that happened was all of those, hallway pleasantries and water cooler conversation. It became all of a sudden very real because you had kids walking in the background and your dogs barking, and people genuinely cared about what was going on in your life. And they were the people that you already had a little bit of connection with. Now, when you're onboarding new people, do we just fall back into the old patterns of, hey, how's it going? How's your day? Or do we really keep being intentional about getting to know people and onboarding them into your life, not just under your company? I think that's going to make a huge, that's going to be everything, which way we go on that.
David, go ahead.
I wanted to go back to the roadmaps, because in the book it's written that so there is the roadmap based on the features and the roadmap based on the outcome for the customers. And so the second one is the right one for product management. But the problem I faced in several companies is that the roadmap is also used to for the budget, to know how much we would need to create something. And I wanted to know how in your side you managed this budget, because in the book it's not written. There are two reasons why we need a roadmap, and the budget reason is not mentioned. It's not part of the list.
Great question. Anyone have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so finance and budget, finance and product don't like to talk, right?
You're right. You're absolutely right, DJ.
Right. Yeah, I'm battling as agile coach, trying to figure out how to get my CFO to really understand what agile is, right? Because he wants that roadmap, as some people were talking about, because he's so used to that project management kind of schedule kind of thing, right? Where it kind of lays out, hey, this is what we're going to deliver functional wise, this is what we're going to deliver non-functional wise. So this is what we're going to go for it. That's it, and then now he's trying to understand, like, oh, you're going to design some of the things that may work, some things may not work. And how does that work with velocity? And how does that work with, with your team's capacity and budget and stuff like that? So it's a very fine walkthrough that we have to do. And when it comes to with the team conversation, what we are finding is we have a team working agreement that we revisit often, and we focus on a one-on-one conversation. I coach my Scrum Masters and product people to say, hey, go have one-on-one with these people. If they're forgetting, if they start seeing problem, I'll ask them, when was the last time you had a one-off video on conversation? Because a lot of time my engineers don't want to keep their video on, right? So during the I tell them, hey, schedule one of those things, because typically when we were co-located, we used to have lunch, or we'll go take a break somewhere, or go after work to bowling or something, right? So that's where it's been very beneficial for us to fix some of that problem.
I was going to say I've got the same issue, David. This is something I've really struggled with as well coming into the role, and I'm trying to figure out, because we're a very project-based organization, and one of the things that I think is really interesting is you almost have to sort of build in time to fail with products, and fail small, right? Like we're gonna prototype something to see if it works, and it's hard to go get money for something like that in a project-based organization, because essentially the question is like, well, what am I going to get as a result of this investment? And the answer is often, we don't know yet. Like we've got to experiment, and that's very hard for a lot of folks to understand. One of the ways and I haven't done this yet, so I will TBD if this actually works or not. I'm trying to build in some funding for a future year to actually start prototyping things before we build the full product. And the example I thought was fascinating, sort of on this topic, that I'm going to try to use, and again, we'll see if this is successful. I actually read a book, not product related at all, but it's a book on the story of the Wright brothers by David McCulloch and their creation of the airplane. And one of the things I thought was so fascinating in there was they started trying to build the airplane, but they really didn't have success building an airplane until they were able to essentially invent the wind tunnel, right? So they were able to go sort of start failing small in a wind tunnel. And there's a great story behind it, but I want to start trying to figure out how our organization can do that, to be able to build in some type prototyping type activities or customer success activities, and just tell finance up front, we're going to go experiment and research, and then we'll come back to you for funding once we know more. That's how I'm trying to tackle it. I really am curious to hear what other people have too, because I'm with you, man. I have this same challenge.
But you have a limited amount of money, and if you're a startup and you're looking for investors, you need to tell them how much they would earn from your experience. So you always need budgets.
That could take us down multiple paths. I want to get back to the specific question David asked before I distract myself and go down another direction. From a budget perspective, that is, you're right. That's where a lot of the roadmap challenge conversation becomes pretty challenging, because we tend to budget based on teams that we're going to commit to some exercise, and especially in a mature company, with a strong finance organization where you need to really kind of think about ROI in more immediate terms. It's easier to have that conversation tying it to features that you believe are going to solve a problem, and you need expertise A, B, and C in order to build feature Y. So budgeting does become pretty challenging. I think one of the things that we've done in the past has been to really kind of, as you try to reshape the teams that you're working with, to think in the context of the business problem or the opportunity or the business objective, to really, you can have that conversation at an investment level, because you've involved the team up front, the way you're thinking about doing, Matt, to kind of have that discovery sprint or that discovery track early on. So you've done some prototyping and development and validation. So now you're having a conversation about, we're budgeting for discovery, and that's just kind of part of our cost of doing business. And at the same time, we're developing this stuff that we've discovered and validated. So that's where our budget's going. We're doing the development on stuff that we've already figured out we're going to go do to solve this problem. And part of that budget is committed to also continuing to discover new solutions to that problem or new opportunities for that problem. So it becomes kind of a team cost. That's the easiest way I can think of to frame that, from my perspective. If I try to retrofit what we've done in the past into this context, I think that's the way I'd hold that conversation. From a parting thoughts perspective, I want to take somebody. I'm going to throw out the question. We talked about this from the perspective of quotes that were impactful to you. I'd like to hear a couple of people just real quickly. What was the most challenging concept that you took away from your most recent read of Inspired? What was your most challenging concept that really made you think, I need to work on that, or I don't quite get that, or that seems really hard? For me, one of the things that I took away was actually pretty early in the book. And it was a reminder that product management is not for the faint of heart. It's a fun, it's a rewarding, it's an exciting job and career, but it's not a 40-hour-a-week job. That doesn't mean you have to spend 15 hours a day in the office every day, but great product managers aren't 9-to-5 workers. You're thinking about, you're a missionary for your product. You're thinking about this constantly. You're constantly researching your industry, your customers, the technology that you need to understand in order to deliver great products. And great product managers work hard, work with great intensity, and they do it 50 to 60 hours a week. It's not sustainable unless you're in love with what you're doing and you really are a missionary and an evangelist for the product, and not just the product, but the problem that you're trying to solve. Anyone else? And I think we talk about work-life balance. And I think that was the challenge for me is we all struggle with that. And it's important to have that work-life balance, but for a product manager, it doesn't fit into the traditional sense of, you shut off work when you walk away from your desk. Great product managers just don't shut it off. Next week, we have Mark Isbitz, who is a regular here at Product Coffee, is going to be talking about experiences and best practices, building a customer advisory board from the ground up when you don't have one, and really taking advantage of that really powerful strategic tool to understand your customer's perspective, not just on your product, but on your business as a whole. That's going to be a great session. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get the early invitation for that tomorrow. And we will look forward to seeing all of you back here next Wednesday morning at 7:30 a.m. Eastern, 8 o'clock to start the program. And thanks to all the new people. Really glad to meet you today, and glad you could join us. And looking forward to seeing you again. Connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with us on YouTube, and connect with us on our newsletter. And we will see you all soon. Have a great day and a great week.